Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sree Iyer. Joining me today is Mohan Krishna Sonti. We had one goal in mind. Mohan is very good at looking at the real data and telling us what it is telling us. There are always all these boasts and counter boasts, hyperboles, exaggerations, whatever you want to call it, about what China can do and will do and does and all that stuff. But what does the data say? He has scoured the earth for data. This took a lot of time to make it, but today Mohanji is ready with his information. Let's take a quick look at what he has to say. Mohanji, namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel. How are you?
Namaste, Shriji. Very nice being here again. So, yeah, go ahead.
The pleasure is all mine, Mohanji. Viewers, Mohanji is going to give us data that is going to be compelling in terms of evidence. So, Mohanji, I yield the floor to you. Please like this video, guys. We really want this thing to go viral. Over to you, sir.
All right. Namaste, everyone. So the thing is regarding the China, we all know that China is it's a bully, and it's not good for the world peace and world order, and it's going to topple that. So I had a lot of discussions with a lot of my friends, and many people had this concern that Bharat might be in trouble because we are the neighbors. So I had to give a lot of reasons, did a lot of research on that, and I see that Bharat is no pushover. And in fact, we can actually stand up very well against China, and we can stand by ourselves. So let's go with the slide deck. All right. So I'll start with, as always, I have all the sources that are listed out here. You can always go back to the slide. There are sources from the news media I've taken from many places. The other sources on the left-hand side, these are only some of them. There are multiple other sources that I had verified and cross-checked and made sure that they all sync up and all the data and numbers and the facts are very truthful and authentic. So you can always go back to the slide and look at it. Now, how we're going to cover this is that we are going to see the China's strategic fault lines and military weaknesses. And I'm going to cover 7 different areas of that, right? One is about the wars that they fought, the geography that China is in, the governance that they have, the military allegiance that they have for their PLA, and military technology that they possess, that the country alliances that China has versus Bharat, and then the culture. So this is mostly about comparing China versus Bharat because many people, like I said, were concerned about China getting way too powerful, and they were worried about how Bharat is going to stand up. And we'll see that we are not only not a pushover, in fact, we can stand up very well and we stack up very well against China. So please follow through all these 7 things. In reality, these 7 are not independent of each other. In fact, they all will converge at some point, and they all are going to work in tandem. All right, so first we'll go with the wars fought. So what are the wars that China has fought? In 1962 is the last time that China has actually claimed a victory. That is the Sino-Indian War, when they had actually claimed a victory. But the end result was is called a status quo antebellum, which means everyone went back to where they were pretty much with not much change on the ground. But that is the only one that they claimed victory, and that is the last time they claimed a victory in a war. Now, if you look at the numbers itself, right, about 1,300 Chinese were killed in Rizangla alone. And this was tabled in our parliament too, and it was mentioned there, saying that 1,300 Chinese, that is just in one area, and many more were killed in other areas. But please take a note here that Chinese claim is only 722, and I want you to keep that in mind, that 1,300 is also verified by independent sources, but 722 is what China claims. Now, the Indian soldiers killed were 1,383. So these are the numbers that were in many sources. So basically, the total number of soldiers that were killed were pretty much almost the same for both of them. But they claimed a victory. There was a status quo antebellum. The duration of this is only 1 month. Also keep that in mind. That's going to come handy later. And the soldiers, there were about 80,000 Chinese soldiers against 20,000 Indian soldiers. Also keep these numbers in mind. You don't have to know the exact numbers, but just understand there's 80K of Chinese and 20K Indian soldiers. Now, there are many reasons why in 62 war, I would say the loss was not a military loss that we had. What we had is more of a political loss, and we'll see why it is a political defeat that we had, and it's our military did actually pretty good. The 1,300 Chinese killed in Rizangla apparently happened with a mere 114 of our soldiers killed that many in one place in 𝗤𝙗𝑔𝑙𝑎. Then came the 1967 Indo-China War, which most Indians are not aware of. This happened in Chola and Nathula, in which China was soundly defeated. There again, 340 Chinese were killed in Chola and Nathula, but the Chinese claim, again watch this, is 32. Many of the numbers that we present, again 88 Indian soldiers were killed. The duration of this was only 3 to 4 days. About 3 days in Chola and I think about a day or so in Nathula. Now, our numbers usually match up with the independent numbers, independent verification. If you see all the independent sources, these numbers are usually very close. But what China claims is a very big disparity. You have seen 1,300 soldiers were killed, Chinese soldiers were killed, they claim 722. In Chola Nathula 340, they claim 32. Now, the next war that they fought, the big war, was the Sino-Vietnamese War in 1979. Again, the status quo antebellum. Nothing much has changed on the ground. Give or take, they're about the same, and nobody claimed a victory there, right? Neither did China nor did Vietnam. Now, on both sides, about 30,000 people were killed. These are from the independent sources. But Chinese claim that only 7,000 of their soldiers were killed. Again, you see the disparity there, right? Now, both sides estimate that about 50,000 were killed on the other side. That's what the Chinese and the Vietnamese have claimed. The duration, again, was about 1 month. The soldiers, the Chinese soldiers, were about 200 to 600,000, depending on how you count them, against the Vietnamese soldiers of 70 to 100,000. Then between 1979 and 91, there were basic clashes and conflicts between China and Vietnam just about the border in an extremely very small area. And it was a status quo after almost 10 to 12 years. And these are minor clashes and conflicts. The total number of people dead in that was about 4,000 Vietnamese and 2,000 of Chinese. And this is 12 years, but these are very minor conflicts and clashes, which we too had with China more recently. So now if you look at it, where does China have an advantage? From 1979 was the last major war that it actually fought. The skirmishes and conflicts and clashes don't really bring in the entire military into the picture, right? So 1979 was the last that they actually went to war, and this is 2024. That is 45 years since China fought a war. Which means if you had a soldier in 1979 who was 20-year-old, he has already retired. And what does that tell you? That Chinese military, the entire military, there isn't a single person who has actually seen a war. So all of the things that they have, all the military so-called preparations, they have never seen a war. And what does war mean? They have never seen a potential death or to their life, or they haven't seen the real blood and the limbs flying around, and they've never seen any of that kind of imminent harm, which most of the other, for example, American military or even the Bharatiya military have seen many of these things. So they actually know what war is and how brutal it actually looks like. But China, there isn't a single soldier who has actually even seen a war, right? So just keep that in mind, and that is very important because a soldier who hasn't seen any war is really not that effective because they don't know what death looks like. Now we go to the geography, the second part of it, right? If you look at the geography, this is the Himalayan barrier. What that means is at the top left corner is the Kashmir and Ladakh, and the bottom right side is the Arunachal Pradesh. So this entire thing is a Himalayan barrier. What this means is, because it is so high, not many soldiers can probably cross over, but none of the heavy machinery, the heavy artillery, or any of the big heavy equipment can actually cross over that barrier. So in case they want to have a war with Bharat, they cannot really bring in any of the big equipment from across the Himalayas. So the military, the army is kind of compromised in that sense. Now come to the Air Force. Even for the Air Force flying over the Himalayas, they cannot carry as much weapons as they normally could because the fighter aircrafts have only so much of a ceiling that they can fly. And when they carry heavy weapons, then the ceiling is much lower. So basically, they cannot even carry heavy weapons even in the Air Force. So the Air Force and Army are severely curtailed because of the Himalayan barrier, right? Now we go to the other part of the geography. Now you see the island-packed sea lanes on the right side. That restricts the naval mobility. In fact, you don't see in this picture that clearly, but there are little dots next to Bharat, that is the Andaman Islands, and that is where we have one of the naval bases. So if you look at the Navy also, they have to pass through all these archipelago of islands and little countries and they cannot sneak past that unless they go all the way around it, which too is not going to work out. So there are only certain pathways that they can go through. And all of those pathways are very closely monitored by our Navy. So it is not viable for China to actually have an effective way of pushing their Navy either. So we have seen a problem with the Army. We have seen a problem with the Air Force. Now, Navy also has a similar issue, which means the war cannot be as effective if they really want to go and invade or attack Bharat, right? Now, the geography part, the third part is about the large coastline and the border. So if you look at it, they have a very large coastline with very hostile neighbors. In the sense, they actually have a conflict with most of the neighbors. We're going to go over that later. And they have an extremely long land border as well. Again, they have disputes with a lot of the neighbors, which means all of those areas are basically something that they have to defend, which means the military is stretching thin. So we have seen that the Army is not as effective across the Himalayas, neither is Air Force. The Navy also has a kind of a blockade because of the islands and the little nations. And then they have a very large coastline and the borders to actually defend, which means it is not a one-to-one match anymore. They need to have an extraordinarily large amount of military arms and everything to actually come over, right? They cannot put up all the resources against Bharat. Then this is the downside of geography. We have seen the first part, the second. The third one is going to be, so a little more about the geography part. The combat rule says that there is a combat 3:1 rule, that is for offense. If in this case, we are not talking about Bharat going and invading China. That is not even the issue that we have. But the question is about whether China is going to invade Bharat. And typically when somebody invades or somebody, the offensive party, typically need to have 3:1 ratio to the one that is defending. Now we look back to the first few slides that we saw about the wars. In 1962, the war ratio, remember I said, look at the numbers, there were 80,000 Chinese and 20,000 Indian soldiers, which means the ratio was 4:1. And in 1979 war with Vietnam, they had almost 3 to 6 times more number of soldiers than the Vietnamese. We have seen those numbers too, which means the 3:1 rule, they actually surpassed the 3:1 rule for the offensive. But yet, the number of deaths in 1962 war were 1,300 on both the sides with Bharat. And 1979 war with Vietnam, there were 30,000 deaths on both the sides, which means China did not really gain much of an upper hand in those days. That is what happened in despite this kind of a rule. The 3:1, they far surpassed it, and they didn't really make good gains. They didn't make good gains even in Vietnam, let alone Bharat. Now, why is the 62 war, I said, is a political defeat for us? Because Nehru actually is, he's claimed to have said, this came in newspaper, that he said to the proposal about increasing our military strength, he said, rubbish, total rubbish. We don't need a defense plan. Scrap the army. The police are good enough to meet our security needs. This is what Nehru actually said. Now, he actually had the general who was believed to be a complete sycophant, who was a General P.N. Thapar. He is the only military general in independent Bharat to have lost a war. And he resigned before even the war ended, the 1962 war ended. So in many ways, this is more like a political defeat because they had a very short-sightedness. As we all know that Nehru was actually selected to be the prime minister by Mohandas Gandhi, despite getting 0 votes in the Congress committee. So this is about the geography and how you see the numbers. The next one is about the governance. In Bharat, we have a democracy. Now, you see that the general election in 2024 turnout was about 66.61%. That is about 2/3 of people actually went and voted. So they actually want the democracy. They want to have a say. The ruling government, BJP, got about 36.56%. That is about 1/3 of the people actually voted for BJP. Another 1/3 voted for other parties, but still, they always participated in the democracy. The last 1/3, even if they have not voted, most of them want to keep the democracy. There are very few people who actually want a dictatorship. There might be some communists and there could be other kinds of lunatics as well. But typically, the democratic society, they want to have that right to vote and select their governance. The total number of parties we have 6 national parties. We have approximately 60 state parties. And we have all the other parties were about 2,700 of them that are registered parties. That's how many we have in Bharat. So you can imagine how many leaders we have and how many political parties we have. And in 2024, the contesting parties were 750 parties and 4,000 independents. Now you see the breadth of how this democracy works and how people actually participate in it, right? Just the parties alone were 750, which is the largest among any country in the world, and 4,000 independents. Now we talk about the free media. Between the publications, the media, and all of them put together, we have close to 150,000 of them. Just keep that number, it's 150,000. It's one of the highest in the world, and that's how many we have as a free media. And we have a very elaborate legal system, and I'm going to talk about legal system later, the reason I highlighted that. In comparison, China is an authoritarian communist dictatorship, which means nobody really knows how much support the dictator actually has. This is a problem with all the dictatorial systems. We have seen how the dictatorships, they seem to be very strong, they seem to make grand progress, but they also make grand mistakes, and then they suddenly fold up and collapse. Because on ground, people typically are not happy with the dictatorship. So if things really go bad, there is a very high potential for a revolt. And the whole way of a dictatorship is it's an iron fist on how they control the people. And we're going to see how they do that in China and versus Bharat. And the reason why the people are very important. When there is a war, the entire Bharat unites, and we have seen that in the past. But in China, you cannot take that for granted, because no one really knows how much they actually support the dictator, Xi Jinping. Now look at the governance other element, right? We are talking about the law and order, the elaborate legal system. In China, the death penalty is classified as a state secret. Nobody knows how many people were actually killed. That is one of the few countries that keeps it as a state secret. And for most of the other countries, you know how many, even in Saudi Arabia and even Iran publishes how many people get executed. But China is one country where the death penalty is classified as a state secret. And why is that? Because the estimates say that about 12,000 people are killed every year. And that was the number till 2007. And after that, the estimates say there are obviously much tighter, you know, they don't have a free media and it's not easy to get the information out. But there are many other ways of pulling the information, and many of the research publications say that at least 8,000 people are executed every year. Now, we know that anytime there is a change in leadership, it's actually a very nervous time for the Chinese. The reason the same leader can continue for longer is because every time there's a change in leadership, imagine that new leader who comes in, he's going to wipe out everyone who is not faithful to him or he's not very loyal. So some say thousands of people are actually executed and killed who are from the opposing party or who are not totally loyal, despite being within the same CCP party, but not entirely loyal to one leader or the other. So that is a very nervous time for them. Unlike our elections, we had 1 billion people and about 600, 700 million people went and voted. Here, they actually fear when there's a change in leadership because 12,000 is what they kill. In Bharat, in death row in 2023, we have 561 people on the death row, meaning the Sessions Court has given a death sentence. But total executed after 1997 were only 8. That is, in the last 27 years, only 8 people were executed, of which 4 was for the 𝗤𝙑𝘖 case in 2020, the rape and murder. There was one rape and murder. In 2004, he was executed. That 5 aside, 3 of them were actually terrorists. One is Ajmal Kasab, who is actually a Pakistani terrorist who attacked in 2008. Afzal Guru is the 2001 parliament attack terrorist. He was killed in 2013. And Yaqub Menon was a 1993 Mumbai blast terrorist. He was executed in 2015. These are all the executions that have ever taken place in Bharat in the last 27 years. Now compare that with what China does. That's why people fear on forget about the free media. You see how the society actually runs there, right? So you cannot be sure. Xi Jinping or others, the Chinese leaders, can never be sure if people are going to support them because you don't know who you have executed. And they execute about 12,000 per year. Now, the same, we are looking at the numbers 561. These are actually the statistics, the statewide distribution of people who were on the death row. But if you look at the death penalty cases and how it functions in Bharat, you'll see that the Sessions Court, for example, in 2023, they've given the death sentence to 120 people. But by the time it went to the high courts, it is not the same 120. This is a snapshot for 1 year. So from all the other previous years, by the time it went to the high courts, about 36 of them were commuted and 36 were acquitted. And only 1 of them was actually upheld and confirmed. That's what the snapshot in 2023. And all these collectively put together, the ones that went to Supreme Court, there were 0 death punishments. There were few more were commuted, few more were that are remanded, and many other things were done. But that is why we have very low death sentence. Yes, they can be in prison for a very, very long time, but death sentence is almost close to 0 for us. So this is the society we have, and we have seen what kind of society they live in. Now, the Chinese military allegiance. Most people don't know that the PLA is not a state military. China is one of the few countries and the only country among the large nations where the country does not have a military. And that might come as surprising to you, but that is because it pledges allegiance to allegiance and loyalty to the CCP, Central Military Commission, which is the party organization, command and control structure. CCP is there at all levels. The benefits for members. Basically, the people who are part of the CCP tends to have a higher promotions and much easier to flow. So that is why the entire military is kind of compromised. People want to be in the military because they want to be close to the CCP, and that gives them some sort of a safety net besides the promotions. Not so in Bharat. In Bharat, it's a voluntary service, and they have traditions over generations and why they want to be in the military. Now, the Great Chinese Famine in 1959 to 1961, about 45 million people were dead. Different estimates coming from 30 million to 40, but this is one of the sources I found did a more thorough investigation on that, and it says 45 million. Of that, at least 2.5 million were beaten and tortured to death because of the purging, all the intellectuals and anyone who questioned the government. Now we also see that in Galwan clash, 2020 clash, about 45 Chinese died in that. All the independent sources say that, but China actually claimed almost a year later, they claimed only 4 people died. The question is, when so many people die in military, you see in democracies, whether it is in USA or in Bharat, the numbers tend to match up very well because we are accountable to it. But in China, what do you think happened to the remaining 40 soldiers? I mean, who are they fighting for and what are they dying for? Right? So that brings down the morale of any military. And you have the same problem in Pakistan as well. Now, the technology in Bharat, the military procurement, we get it from almost 25 plus nations, and we have a matching indigenous technology as well. There are few areas, the critical areas, where we are still developing it, but for most of the things, we are entirely capable of developing things on our own. But we have a choice to pick from different nations and pick the best of everything, and which we do it from 25 other nations because we have a great relation. For example, jet engine, the 𝗣𝗲𝗄𝗏 engine is one of the more critical technologies, and people often talk about that. That started in 1989, and so far we have spent about 2,101 crores till 2018. That comes to close to $1 billion, converted to the money value at that time from 89 to now. Now, our focus is more upon the denial of the weapons. We have smaller number, but we have a better technology. We may not have as big a fleet, as big of the tanks and everything, but all of them are of a superior quality and technology because we incorporate things from the best of all the nations. And then the places where we are better at it, we incorporate our indigenous components into it. Even though we are capable of producing almost everything. Now, jet engine is one example where we are lacking, and you see how much we have spent and where we stand today should be ready in the next few years. For China, the military procurement pretty much comes from Russia, and that's about it. And the rest of it is indigenous. There are a few minor things from other countries, but majority comes from either Russia or it is on their own. What that says is many of the technologies, essentially, that is not necessarily the best of what they have. Many of them are extremely inferior, but you may not really know it because there is a state media. The media is not a free media like ours. So you can have like 10 crashes of their plane and nobody will know about it. Now for the jet engine, just a common example, right? They claim that they have already made a few 100 or 200 samples of the jet engine. They're flying it, but many of that aircraft is sold to Pakistan. And even the main aircrafts that they have, the engines are still mainly procured from Russia. The jet engine, they started in 1986. We started in 89. And we spent so far $1 billion as of 2018, whereas China approved $16 billion as of 2013. About 2013, they approved $16 billion more. Some estimates say that all the way to $50 billion is what they have spent. We spent close to $1 billion. Our scientists and our departments, I know people are very critical of them, but if you look at it, we actually do a very fine job. Our scientists and our engineers are really superior. They do a very good job at with a very minimal budget. We see the same thing for our ISRO too. They have a very large number. Chinese have large numbers in terms of the aircrafts and tanks and everything. They mass produce everything, but they are of a very inferior technology. They can brag all they want. Most others, outsiders, don't know what the real quality is until it goes to a real war, which they have never fought in the last 45 years. So we don't know what the truth in that is. But for us, we have one of the finest quality because we procure from all the nations. Then the country alliances. China has a territorial dispute with Bhutan in the Doklam, Bharat in several places, Arunachal Pradesh, Aksai chain and all that. Japan on the Senkaku Islands, Taiwan and Vietnam on the Paracel Islands. They had a lot of wars there, and South China Sea with Brunei, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Taiwan, and the international shipping is they have a quarrel with almost several nations around it. The territorial disputes that China has, it has it with over half of all the bordering neighbors. And remaining neighbors too, we're going to see that here as well. So it actually has a proactive disputes with all of them. Now, the places where it claimed to have resolved the disputes, like the Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Laos, Mongolia, Myanmar, Nepal, North Korea, Pakistan, many of them still have the contentious issues, and many of them were forced to the table. A large chunk of their land was actually taken away. That includes even North Korea, believe it or not. It took even the North Korean land and made it sign a deal and made sure that there is so-called a resolved dispute. Many of these nations actually, the places like in Nepal where they have a democracy, the opposition parties sulk that and they're not very happy with what one party has signed. So the dispute is still kind of simmering in the background, and China continues to claim larger piece of land. Then China has the debt traps. As of 2022, the top 10 countries are listed here. On the left side, you have the top 20 countries. And you can see the Pakistan, Angola, Sri Lanka, Ethiopia, all of those. And Bangladesh, you see all of them in the debt traps. Now, in Bharat, we have a territorial dispute with only two of them, China and Pakistan. And we have resolved the disputes with Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. And we have some minor issues, but nothing that actually went to any kind of a major conflict with them. Unlike China, which actually has a major conflict and potential military standoff, we never had that kind of a standoff with any one of these. And friendship, we are the only nation that is friend with the USA and Russia and Ukraine. Even though Russia and Ukraine are fighting, and USA and Russia are supposed to be poles apart, we are friends with all of them. Iran and Saudi Arabia and Israel and Palestine, you would think all of them are bitter enemies, but you are friends with all of them. North Korea and South Korea. In fact, during COVID time, we actually helped North Korea with the COVID vaccines. We maintain a relationship even with North Korea and South Korea. And our stated position is to see how both the Koreas can unite in a very peaceful way. We have a relation with Argentina as well as UK, which have disputes over the Falkland Islands. And in G20+1 in 2023, we added African Union. So we have a great relation with Africa as well. As Ramayana and Mahabharata, anyone who reads that knows that we all are about forming, all of Mahabharata and Ramayana is about forming alliances, and we are naturally good at it. So we work on that. Then the culture, the historical identity, we have the customs, cuisines, devatas, culture, language, celebration, we maintained all of them. And China has actually, it follows communism like a Western Abrahamic cloning system. Basically, it's a social cloning project, like for the Christianity and all of that. It's all social cloning projects where everybody does the same thing. So in China, most of the languages were wiped out, most of the cultures were wiped out, and they want to create one single system for the whole country. But not so for us. We actually have more than half of world's languages. And again, the Arthashastra given by Chanakya is kind of what we follow here. In China, it is the Art of War by Sun Tzu, which is very famous. People think the Art of War is all about the war, but not really. If you read the Art of War, the chapter 1, it starts off with saying that the warfare is based on deception. And in chapter 3, it says, subdue the enemy without fighting. In fact, the whole Art of War, if you read it carefully, it is about how not to go to war. But not so with Arthashastra. Arthashastra is a very comprehensive text. And this is part of our culture and of our nature inherently, because we hear this all the time in society too. For Chinese, the Art of War is in their culture. So many of them are deception techniques. Now you go back to the original one. You see on why they come to the border and they try to needle everyone. because they want to test the waters. They want to look big when they're really small, and they want to look weak when they're really strong, and so on and so forth. Everything that they do is deception, and how they control the media, how they control everything. So nothing that comes out of China is actually trustworthy. So just because they say they have such a big fleet and such a big thing, and we have had the cutting edge technology, nothing can be trusted, as we have seen in the real wars too. Their entire culture is about how not to go to war. And if you remember, during the Doklam too, they have all this propaganda machinery, right? Where they say we are going to destroy Bharat, we're going to come to Delhi and things like that. But they really did nothing. So the key is not to get worried, because the propaganda plays a very significant role when it comes to the warfare based on deception. Whatever they say, nothing is trustworthy. Whether it's good or bad, nothing is trustworthy. For us, Arthashastra is very comprehensive, gives a full view of what can be done. So I would say, almost in conclusion, that if China were to go to war with Bharat, in my opinion, that will probably be the last war that China will ever have before it gets dismantled. Because when we go to war, a democracy and all the aforementioned points put together, we actually coalesce very, very fast, because we all want our freedom, we want to save our culture, we want to be together. But in China, we don't know what the dictatorship brings. Said that, is it dangerous? Yes, we had the Nazis in the past, we have seen it. They can cause massive destruction. And we are seeing that China can have a famine in their own country where they killed 45 million people, and 2.5 million, they tortured them to death. So you don't know what they can do to others. So the Chinese people itself, will they support the dictator? Probably not. The unwritten contract is, as long as China does good in economy, people are supporting. If things go south, in case of a war, you don't know how China will split up. I think that will be the last war China will ever have if they ever go to war with Bharat. So in conclusion, I would say that China is certainly a dragon, definitely a ferocious dragon, but that is imaginary, and we don't have to fear that. But Bharat is like an elephant. Our elephant is strong, intelligent, very calm and sure-footed. And Bharat is real. This elephant is real. The dragon is imaginary. So,
thank you so much, Mohanji. I have a couple of questions from your slides. Can we go back to slide 14, please?
okay. I don't see the number, but
let me tell you which one is 14. Now, I can bring it up. Just give me 1 second.
Okay.
Yeah, we are on 14 now.
Yep.
Hang on. Let me make sure. Yeah, we are on 14 now. Now, if you look at the territorial disputes that you mentioned here, I got the wrong one.
The resolved disputes? Or
is it 15? Just give me 1 second. I'm trying to make up my mind. I have the questions here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, jet engine. Yeah, 14, jet engine. This is the one. See, if you look at the current war, whether it is Israel versus the 3 H's or even Iran versus even what's happening between Ukraine and Russia, the maximum damage is not happening from fighter aircraft, but rather it is happening from missile technology, right?
Correct.
So that begs the question, do you think that future wars will not really have a lot of air force?
Actually,
although I have a rider. I'll come to that rider in just a moment. I want your input on this one. Then I'll come to the rider.
Okay. So what was interesting is, I mean, there's a lot of, when I did all this research, I mean, we had to present in just 30 minutes. But I want viewers to go over each one of these points and dig deeper into each one of these segments. In fact, Bharat has, I wanted to add the denial weapons. When I mentioned about denial weapons, it's all about the missiles and other technology that we have added. In fact, that's where in the last 10 years, we have invested the most. You see the number of missiles that we have, not only did we get from other countries, like from France, Israel, and many other places, and USA, we also have our own missiles too. And the spectrum is like unbelievable. Something that the number of missiles that we have inducted in the last 10 years. So it's basically area denial. We can strike deep inside the other country, and we can deny their aircrafts or any one of them to come inside. So when the 5th generation fighter aircrafts come in, there is a possibility the Air Force still has a certain role. Between countries like Bharat and China, I don't see much. Like I said, there's already a Himalayan barrier. So I don't see much of the heavy equipment at all. And same goes with the naval. And so we don't see much action in that. But as far as missiles go, we have plenty of them. In fact, those are the ones that we have made the most progress in the last 10 years. So please do the research. I would ask you to look at do the research and look at how many things we have inducted in the last 10 years.
Yes, indeed. And let me give you the counter. See, if you look at the Iran-Israel conflict, because now it has gone past the 3 H's with direct Israel versus Iran, what we noticed was the maximum damage inflicted by Israel on Iran was using their fighter aircraft. So you have to have, it looks like it's a combination. First you use the missiles to take down some strategic things, so that then you go with aircraft, because you can pinpoint the targets with much greater accuracy. That's what it seems to me. I don't know what the reasoning.
We have the hypersonic missiles, the BrahMos and all of them. We do have the cutting edge missiles there. And as far as the missile shields go, we have quite a few number. We have our own indigenous ones. We get some from Russia, and there are many other augmented ones. So we have a very well-designed the missile shield for us. Said that, we also have the Sukhois and many other fighter aircrafts and the Rafales, which too can carry over all those attacks like Israel did. But the chances are Chinese are not going to do this, because we can respond in kind the same way. We're not looking at some hundreds of aircrafts, because most of them will be shot down before they even cross over the Himalayas. So we're not looking at an effective way. The Iran and Israel have, in terms of technology, there is a very huge gap, enormous gap. And this is really the Western, the American technology, right? And we also possess, in terms of technological gap, we also have a superior weaponry compared to Chinese. That we can be absolutely certain of.
Next slide, please. Next one, please. Yeah, this is what I wanted to do. Sorry about that. Mohanji, look at the debt traps. Debt traps, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh are very, very high. And in both these countries now, you are seeing a left-leaning government. Like it or not, that's what it is. Now,
yes,
what gives them the feeling that China is going to bail them out? China itself has gone into bankruptcy, serious bankruptcy.
So actually, including even Pakistan, the local people do not like that at all. See, the governments function a little different. In fact, if they continue on this path, there's going to be a revolution within those countries, and they're going to go into an anarchy, like it's going to happen in Pakistan. We'll see that pretty soon, how there's going to be some sort of a civil war, because that simply cannot continue. So it's almost like the dictatorship in other places. Even in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, they can hold on for some time. They can cause a lot of damage. But end of the day, they also know that if Bharat loses, they will not even exist, because China is going to engulf them. It's going to destroy them completely. So end of the day, they know how to survive.
Mohanji, one thing that it pains me a lot is it might not be in the top 10 here, but Nepal also is getting sucked into this debt trap of China. Right? You look at Nepal, the way Nepal looks at its neighbor India. Look at Bangladesh, look at the way they look at its neighbor India. Look at Sri Lanka, look at the way they look at India. I'm not even bringing in Pakistan. Pakistan has a visceral hatred. And that means they have basically stopped thinking. And intelligence have left the country. We all know that. So that is going to collapse under its own compulsions and conflicts. Let's leave it at that. But these three offer hope. But what is the intelligentsia in these countries doing? I mean, they have not all left. Also, another thing I've noticed, sir, outside, when you talk to a Nepalese American here who's got roots in Nepal, much more balanced and reasoned. But inside,
all of them, yeah. See, for Nepal and countries like that, and Sri Lanka, we actually have a deep influence in those countries at a cultural level. So culturally, they are much closer to us. In Nepal, for example, if you look at it, many of their families are actually on the Tibet side. So many of them are also coerced into just accepting what the China is doing. But that will not continue forever. We have a people-to-people relationship, which is far better. It's almost like, think of it this way. Even though Russia is our closest ally and closest friend for last almost like 50 to 60 years, right? But majority of Indians actually come to USA. because we have a people-to-people interaction. And this is any day of a much closer friendship. So this is how things work. And America has always taken actions that are anti-Bharat, but still this is still a closer country, because when the time really comes up, America is a fellow democracy. It's a pluralistic nation. Same over here. I mean, until the things are pushed to the corner, you never know which side they'll actually lean. It is not necessary that just because China has it can control the government, but the people is a very different matter. So they do have we have a very close relationship with Sri Lankans and Nepalis, right? So it is not just linear. Don't assume that just because you have a government friendship does not necessarily translate to people. Like an example I gave is between Russia and America. You see, most Indians are in America. Even though Russia has a very deep friendship with us for the last 60 years, and America has done a lot of things that are against Bharat, and they keep supporting Pakistan, yet most Indians come to USA. It's because it's a people-to-people relation, which is very different from government. And government can change. They can change their stance pretty fast. In fact, think about it. I think they can get rid of their debt overnight. If they actually go to war, they can get rid of their debt. They don't have to pay up.
In fact, India built the parliament building for Afghanistan. India also built their biggest libraries. They've also had built 1 or 2 dams, and 3 more were in construction in that kind of stop now. I mean, these are things that will give you long-term benefits.
Actually, we have people-to-people relation. Actually, if you look at that, that's why we are friends with all the countries across the spectrum. We can be friends with Israelis and Iran and Saudi and Palestinians. We are friends with everyone in the spectrum. It's like from the Ramayana and Mahabharata. It's ingrained in our culture. It's forming alliances. We don't have disputes with anyone. In fact, even in World War II, we never had a dispute with anybody. It was completely unnecessary for Mohandas Gandhi to drag us into the World War II and slaughter 100,000 of our soldiers. Otherwise, we have no dispute with anyone. And that is a long-lasting solution. So these are all transient and temporary, the way I see it, because these cannot last for long.
Yes, indeed. And let's take a few questions from our viewers. I have one last question. I'll save that for the last. Let's take some questions from our viewers, if you don't mind, Mohanji. Nangat Ranga wants to know, Namaskaram, there have been reports of deteriorating Chinese economy, weapons, etc. Yet China is managing. Their weapon sales also on. How are they managing?
So basically, if you look at it, many of them are, for us, when our sales depend on, we have a quality product, but we also are dependent on other countries. So China does push it, like it has a debt traps. It does push to certain countries, but you know which countries it actually buys from China. Not everybody gets it from China, right? So it pushes to only a certain small segment of them. So their economy, actually their banking system is kind of in shambles. And many of their weapons and all of that, they sell it to Pakistan, for example. What options do Pakistan have? Right? We don't, the JF-17, for example, that was not even inducted by China. They built it and they gave it to Pakistan. So we don't know the quality of them. Like I said, China is about deception technique. So what they do, what they sell, the BRI, the CPEC, they sell dreams and they will sell whatever they have. And they simply have to probably purchase the counter product, the counter side dictators and just sell it to them. Otherwise, they're not really doing good.
Next one, please. Saroj Mishra wants to know, what about Indo-Tibetan border police? Tibetan refugees used to be used for secret disturbances?
So Indo-Tibetan border police is actually, there's also paramilitary for that. And these are very fierce and ferocious warriors. And we do have quite a few of them. Their role is entirely not known. The government does whatever needs to be done. But end of the day, we know that we have a lot of Tibetans on our side, and that is an eventual goal to eventually have a buffer state. So that is going to happen someday when the time is right.
Next one, please. Maithili Aran wants to know, Mohanji Namaskarams, heard that Bharat is making their own API, the raw material used for manufacturing vital medicines. Your views, sir?
I mean, if you're talking about the pharmacy industry, I think Bharat is completely self-sufficient. In fact, not just in the pharmacy industry, but also in bioweapons, to all of them. We have all the technology needed. We are not really dependent on any country on that. In fact, many of the pharmaceutical medicines can actually export it from Bharat to outside countries. So we are fully capable of developing everything.
Next question, please. Srinivas Kampampati wants to know, Namaste Mohanji, Namaste Sree Iyer ji. Please throw light on corruption in China and Bharat.
So Bharat has enough corruption, and we can always see that, and that's why we have all these political parties that quarrel among themselves and they try to pull each other's leg. But think about it, in China, there is no one to pull them. The corruption is very, very deep, and it is worse than in Bharat. It's just that there is nobody to report it, and there's nobody else to challenge the single party that they have. Otherwise, their corruption is at an extreme level. For example, if you're seeing the numbers for the jet engine, we spent $1 billion, and there are so many questions that are coming up for the GTRE on why it took so long and what happened to the Kaveri engine. We spent only $1 billion from 1989 till now 2018. They started jet engine project in 1986, and again in 2013 they invested $16 billion. The estimates say that they invested close to $50 billion. We did $1 billion. They did $50 billion. Where did the money go? So they spend a lot of time on reverse engineering, cheating, stealing. They do all of those things. And a country that does that, it's not that they steal only from outside. It is corruption even within the government. It's just that nobody reports it. So Bharat is corrupt. There are a lot of corrupt things, but we also have fantastic people as well. And we can see it. The same is with America too. It isn't that different. All the democracies, they have corruption, but there are some checks and balances that reigns that thing. In dictatorships, nobody will ever know it. There is nobody to challenge CCP, and there is nobody to report it either. There's no free media. And as you have seen, if 12,000 people are getting executed per year, nobody wants to stand up. So these are, in fact, wide difference between the two in terms of corruption. We just don't hear about it.
Manav-san wants to know, China's manufacturing capacity is 5 times America's. Pentagon report says China's shipbuilding capacity is 230 times America's. When will Chinese Navy surpass US Navy? Is that when they'll invade Taiwan?
So Chinese Navy will never surpass US Navy anytime in the next several decades, probably not even in a century. For the simple reason that they can manufacture as many numbers as they want. They had the same issue between during the Cold War between Russia and America. Russia actually manufactured, they had a line manufacturing for all the tanks and everything. America had fewer of them, but of a very high quality. So you can say that there are about 70 submarines that America has and 70 submarines that China has. But each of the submarine, like the Ohio class submarine that America has, is, I would say, at least 20 years ahead of what China can ever produce. Each one of them. The aircraft carriers, America has 11 of them. And you look at the size and the experience they have, they are way ahead of almost anything that China can ever have. In fact, that surpassing is more like they're just doing some measurement based on numbers. Just because you have, like, say, 70 submarines doesn't mean anything. Because each submarine in that American military possesses has vastly more capability. So you actually have to look at the specs. Look at the specs and you will know it. Same goes with China has 5th generation. Can they ever produce anything that's close to, say, B-2 bombers? Nothing. Or F-35s, there's nothing that even comes close. Absolutely nothing that comes close. And America has hundreds of them, or even thousands of them. So nothing comes close. Even the main battle tanks, nothing comes close to the Abraham tanks. Nothing. So these are just number gimmicks. So you can see the numbers. I would say if there was a real war between America and China today, China won't last more than a week. America is way ahead of it. Almost, I would say almost a couple of decades ahead of China in terms of technology, the superiority of the technology. The numbers don't matter. It's almost like you can have 100 bicycles. That doesn't help. Right? So, but here they have something superior.
What about cyber capabilities? Ravi BS wants to know.
So cyber capabilities, you have a similar scenario. Yes, China can. I mean, this is something which is relatively unknown because there are at least 4 or 5 nations that are investing very heavily into this. China could have good capability, but so does America. Never underestimate America. So it's not like they can overtake that. And same goes with Bharat as well. We are not somebody who has, many people give an impression as if we don't really have that capability. We do have our own native capability, and we have done that for a very long time, right? So, but for China, it's because it is offensive and because they're destructive in nature, so people get worried. Other than that, it's not because they have an extraordinary capability. It's like if they have a technology, they can misuse it, and that's what worries everyone. But others do possess technology and almost at par, if not surpassing it. And America certainly has it much better than China. But even Bharat is not too far behind. We are made to look that way, but in reality, we are not. It's just that we don't flaunt about it. We don't go on a destructive spree. And nobody feels threatened about it. And that's why you don't hear about what Bharat does. But we have very sophisticated systems too.
Well, Wing Commander Video wants to know, Special Frontier Force, also called Vikas battalions, consists of Tibetan soldiers. They are called in mainly for clandestine ops. Good to know.
Yes, I did mention the Tibetan soldiers. The Tibetans, they're pretty ferocious warriors. They're in the paramilitary and many other places. Not much is known about them, and they keep it that way quite deliberately. But really, they're one of the fierce warriors that we have.
A slightly different topic, viewers, on the similar note, but not exactly on this context. I wanted to observe one thing. Mohanji, have you seen this new bond, dollar-denominated bonds being offered by China, and these were being offered in Saudi Arabia? And people are saying, oh, wait a minute, now China can really challenge the United States, because the dollar, which the treasury sells all the money, the treasury bills are sold to make up for the deficits, and now China can challenge them. My observation is China doesn't have the billions of dollars in its war chest right now, and this is just a game to try and change it. The money that is there is with Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and if Kingdom of Saudi Arabia goes and starts investing in buying these bonds, and then they ask them to pay up, you have to see why China is not allowing American corporations to repatriate their profits. It's going on for 5-6 years now.
So one of the reasons is, if you look at it for Chinese, right, the unwritten bond that they have with the people is that they always are going to make some progress in terms of economy. And the day they stop doing that, like any other dictatorship, when there is a hardship, there is a potential for revolution, because what have got people to lose, right, once they have nothing to eat. And that is when China has to do something like they did for the Great Leap Forward, when they killed 45 million people. So that is not going to be a good time for China at all. And it becomes even more difficult in today's age. Back in 1960s, maybe they could have pulled something like that, but today it's going to get really difficult. So China has to show profits. It has to show that it's doing a growth. In America or in Bharat, in democracies, if you have a recession, that is not the end of the world. In the worst case scenario, the government will change. All right. But in China, that is not the case. The only way they can change it is through a revolution. And therefore, they do all kinds of gimmicks to show a profit. None of that, we cannot be sure if that is even a real profit. That is the reason they have the debt traps they do their banking system is in shambles. They manipulate things. None of it is actually real. And what they show to the world, remember the art of war, Sun Tzu, I put up the first rule. The entire warfare is about deception. So they always show themselves to be doing really fantastic. Russia actually did that like an iron curtain, and suddenly one fine day it just broke to pieces. Who would have guessed it, right? So China has lots of internal problems which it completely hides.
Well, Russia got Sun Tzu, if you ask me, because if you look at 1986, I was a student at that time. I think I've said this in a couple of episodes before. Do you know what the cost of 1 gallon of petrol was at that time? 53 cents. Okay. 53 cents. Summer of 1986 was the best time to be, because I could drive and not spend even on a student's scholarship. I had so much money. It was just great. Why I'm saying all that is that 53 cents a gallon in US price was possible because the United States was forcing the OPEC to keep the prices low. The prices were around $13 per barrel. it was not hurting these countries as much as it was hurting the USSR, which was completely dependent on the revenues from petrol from the Ural Mountains. Once that dried up completely, they could not afford to keep forces in Afghanistan. All the outlying areas completely collapsed. So this is how, United States actually did a Sun Tzu to USSR to bring them down. And I think the same thing is going to happen to China also. They will get out Sun Tzu'd, in my opinion. I could be wrong. But one more thing, sir.
One thing I want to mention is they can play some games in terms of the economy, what they learned from Russia. But as long as they have this communism, it has too many faults and too many flaws in it. So even if they cover up on one aspect, which they desperately do it, and nobody really knows how much of that is even really true, because we heard about the ghost towns and we know what happens in Xinjiang province. See, most of the things, nobody can question it. And that is a problem. And so which means the China could be hollow from inside and nobody will know about it.
Exactly. My point. And last thought, viewers. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Look out for this country because they are awash in dollars. Very true. In fact, if you want to get a hint on where the future of IPL lies, look at where the auction took place this year. Anyone want to guess where the auction took place this year? Do you know, Mohanji?
No.
This year's auction was in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
So it's just the same thing like a slave market, except the slaves are the IPL players. Sorry, I'm being brutal because I got completely disillusioned about this game, and that's what is going to happen. They are going to buy up all the franchises. There'll be some. It will not lose its Indian names, but the real owner is going to be from Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. My guess.
One last point I wanted to mention is somebody was talking about how Chinese are very wealthy, but think of it this way, right? I mean, a lot of people think China has higher GDP and all that. Just higher GDP does not necessarily mean people are doing okay, because the wealth itself could be distributed very disproportionately. That's number one. And number two is, if you've seen, even a billionaire in China is not safe, right? No. When a billionaire can disappear, then what to say about the common man, right? So it is not necessarily that just because you have much money, you'll be fine and safe. I think a democracy, inherently, we love a democracy more than anything else. So that's why we are more resilient compared to any dictatorship, which could be completely hollow from inside. Who knows? When you break it, it can shatter immediately.
Yes, indeed. And the picture has just started, gentlemen. We'll be back with more things about this. Mohanji and I will be coming back and analyzing it. Mohan will do all the work. I'll just pass here and there some easy questions and things like that. Thank you so much, Mohanji. Always a pleasure to have you on our channel.
Yeah, namaste.